Mark Silverstein, that's who I am.
And Kathy Fowler. We are veteran TV news reporters. We call ourselves recovering reporters who turn to the dark side and now work as PR and marketing gurus.
We're excited to welcome our guest today, WTOP reporter Neal Augenstein. Let me tell you a little bit about Neal Augenstein, if you don't know, and you're going to find out a whole lot of stuff about him. He's a reporter, as I said, for TOP Radio. That is the powerhouse radio station of all news radio across the country, and he is the powerhouse reporter at the powerhouse all news radio station WTOP. He's been there since 1997, UPI before that, and has covered everything from the Chandra Levy case to 9/11 to the Beltway sniper to everything that is going on today. Always a fun fact about Neal. Not only is he a member of the mod band called Modest Proposal, but as a reporter, he was the first to use the iPhone as his primary field production device. Neal Augenstein joins us today on After Deadline. I am excited that Neal is with us. He is forsaking his nap to be with us at this time of day. So we are honored just to have that. Neal, good to have you on, man. Good to see you.
Hello, friends. Good to see you again. Always glad to hear what you are up to, and delighted to be a part of whatever it is that you are working on.
Well, if you can figure it out, let us know. All right.
Whatever you're
the
doing.
Reporter. All right, so let's dive into this. Let's get a little Neal Augenstein history. When did you decide that you wanted to be in the media? When you wanted to be the iconic Neal Augenstein, WTOP Radio?
Well, I went to university, which you may remember because you were my classmate, and I went to school for broadcast journalism. I grew up wanting to be a DJ because I love the excitement of radio. I went to
Captain
school.
and Neal days. Is that the
I went to school, and when I graduated with my degree in broadcast journalism, I realized there was a problem. I don't like the news. I found it very boring, especially politics. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? So while I liked the idea of being on the radio, I wasn't so crazy about news. It was very complicated. It was very boring. It was very political. So I figured, I better figure out something. So then I started producing talk radio shows, which was a little bit closer to the entertainment side.
Were there shows that we know?
I produced Morton Downey Jr., who you might know.
The Mouth?
The mouth that roared.
He's the guy who started all of this.
He certainly is. And I produced at the WRC, which was a local talk radio show with Joel A. Spivak speaking, and just a whole bunch of other folks, and learned about talk radio. Then when those jobs dried up, I figured, I like radio, but I better start looking for a way to stay employed. And that had a chance to do some news with the United Press International Radio Network.
Who are they?
UPI.
The World Desk of UPI, of United Press International. Isn't that was that you? The World Desk of United Press International?
Yes. At one time, the most famous wire service there was, even before Associated Press. And there, they were down on their luck, which may have something to do with why they hired me. But I got a chance to learn about the news business. And over time, I got to do a whole bunch of reporting in the Washington area, including covering the White House and working with Helen Thomas, who I'm sure that you remember. And that was my introduction to news. And after a while, I started to like it. And I figured out, you know what, my job, if I can understand something, if I can ask enough questions and be willing to look silly enough in asking enough questions until I understand something, maybe I can explain it to others. And that really is the basis of what news gathering is. And then you have to figure out a way to tell the story in a relatable way. You can add in a whole bunch of things that you learned in college that you didn't think were terribly important, like ethics. And that's
What
sort of
class
how
was
I
I?
got.
Well, I missed that class. What's
We
that's
weren't
how the same one on that same class on that one.
Yeah.
Well, Neal, you said something really interesting about you didn't really like news. Well, recently there was an article about transforming news it's solutions journalism. I read this article about a lot of reporters even hate it's like such bad news and they're basically wondering, the question is transforming news, and should we stop like giving people so much bad information at one time with no hope. Like people need hope, like they need air and water to breathe. So are we delivering it in a bad way, where in a way we're just like shutting people out, and instead of engaging them and getting them fired up to do something, they're just disengaging us, turning us off, and ignoring us altogether? I don't know. That article obviously something you probably haven't read, but you might have heard, being a nerd from a journalist.
Neil reads
perspective.
articles. He reads articles.
Oh, no. I'm just saying he may not have read that article, but I'm just saying you probably have heard the criticism is, why do you guys have to talk about bad news all the time? I don't even listen anymore.
Of course, there sure is a lot of bad news out there, and a long time ago, even before we started in the business, there was the adage, if it bleeds, it leads, and that hasn't changed. That still is the case. Unfortunately, there's a lot of life out there besides bad news, and I think that part of what a journalist can do is reflect the good and bad of life. And while, yes, it's important to tell bad news, it is important. It's very valuable for a reporter to tell bad news in context, with perspective. I think that it's certainly okay to infuse a little hope in there and put things into perspective enough so that bad news doesn't have to last forever. I think that there is the risk of overwhelming people and depressing people so much that that they can't stand it. I like to reflect what's happening in the world, and when I say the world, I mean my immediate world. I don't, the world around us. As you know, WTOP is a local news station, so most of our focus is, my focus is certainly on local news rather than international news. But I do think that reflecting on the good and the bad and being seen as an honest broker is about the most valuable thing that I can do.
You talked about asking dumb questions or stupid questions or whatever at some point or whatever. Do you remember the worst question you've ever asked because I remember one I did. So, I'm still haunted by it.
There have certainly been some questions there was one question that I asked. There was I guess it was during the Clinton White House, and there was the Energy Secretary, Federico Pena, this was during the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And all of a sudden, he announced that he was resigning. So he held a news conference at the Energy Department, and I went there and I asked. He gave the answer that politicians always give, that he's leaving to spend more time with his family. And I asked, have you heard anything? Is there any suggestion that perhaps there's some sort of an indictment or a criminal charge that might be spurring this? He answered me with, it's questions like this that give the media a bad name. The audience erupted in boos for me. They were cheering him. It was a lynch mob for the reporter who was sitting there. Unfortunately, none of my other reporter colleagues had the guts to ask a follow-up.
Nobody backed you up?
Nobody backed me up. So they left me sitting there. It was on Today, New York Daily News, New York Post, New York Times, Washington Post. They all detailed the question that Neal Augenstein of UPI asked. So some people were some
But it was a legitimate question. It was a totally legit question.
Of course it was. Certainly given the climate, Helen Thomas, to her credit, said it was the question that had to be asked. And so that, I always have a soft spot in my heart for Helen, even though my editor of the day was furious with me. How could you go out on such a limb to ask that question? Our jobs is to ask questions, and some of them are stupid and some of them are wrong, but we get to ask questions. That's the job. And if the answer is no, the answer is no.
Hey, and we were always taught as kids, no question is a dumb question. No, wait, did you find out later that there was something to your question, or no?
No, there wasn't anything to it. And in hindsight, would I have done the same thing today? No, I would have tried to get his press person to the side. I would have asked the questions off mic, and I would have gotten the answer that there was nothing to it, and that's fine. I'm glad to get the answers in any form, and I would have had less publicity, negative publicity in this case for that particular question.
Well, the one thing a reporter hates is to be the story. You're like, every now and then it might be okay if they're saying, wow, amazing reporting, but most of the time you're like, no, I'm not the focus. The focus is who I'm writing about. So
yeah, in this particular case, it certainly is a question that I would have asked off mic if I had the access to the person. And for a couple of reasons. First off, if you have a great question, why waste it at a press conference where everyone else is going to be able to record the answer, right?
That's
so
I
really should have just asked it, off mic quietly. If he was in fact leaving because he was indicted, then I would have had an exclusive, rather than just being fodder in the gossip columns for a while.
Go ahead,
Kathy. Go ahead.
No, I'm like, I did that. That just reminds me, like, those gotcha kind of moments. Like, so many people who don't understand reporters, they don't know how we tick. They don't get our mindset. They think that, you are trying to make X person look bad because, or you're trying to, go after that person with the tough questions because you don't agree with their politics and you do agree with this person's politics. And I always try to explain, you don't get it. Like, reporters want a scoop. They want an exclusive. That's what they live for. And they want to get the story right. They want to uncover something. They want to tell something that nobody else knows. And they don't care about the politics behind it. Do you have to defend that position, or do you have to explain that to people too? Like, you don't get how reporters tick. We don't tick because we're like Republicans or we're Democrats and we're trying to go after a certain party. That's not how reporters work. That's not in the DNA of a good reporter.
I love how Pat says "we're" as a
Well, I'm a former.
We're a recovering journalist, as we always
recovering.
Say.
I do a lot of crime reporting, in the courts, and I talk to prosecutors all the time, and I talk to defense lawyers all the time, and I come out to both of them, and I say, look, my job is I work both sides of the street. I ask, I ask questions from you, and I ask questions from the other side. And, you both know that I'm looking for you to share information with me that I can report. And whichever side it's going to be on, I'm going to report. I'm not going to not report something because I don't, because I want the defendant to get off scot-free. I'm not going to, I wouldn't not report that if the defense, leaks me some good information. I'm going to, regardless of the information I get, I'm going to try to report on it accurately, and I'm going to try to report on it in context, and what it means, and how it affects the criminal trial or an investigation. And I think that I've been at this long enough so that both sides feel comfortable that even though I'm going to report, there's going to be times when I report negatively about their side, they know that I'm going to report accurately about what I'm learning. And so when I'm gonna be doing a story that casts somebody in a negative light, and this, I think that this is important for you guys, in representing your clients, I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions so that I can understand how mistakes could have been made, how, what happened, what the extenuating circumstances might have been. And I'm going to, I'm taking, if you're willing to share with me the details of how something went wrong, I'm going to ask enough questions so that I can, I'm going to get a sense from you whether you believe that mistakes were honestly made. That happens in this world. There are things that happen that things don't work out the right way. And if I ask enough questions and you're willing to share with me enough information, then I can put things into perspective. And I think that works out well for both of us, because I think the public does. The problem you run into is when you don't provide enough information, and the reporter and the public on social media is slamming and ripping you on, for what your motives must be. But tell me what happened, and trust me enough to understand what happened, and I'll try to tell that in a measured way.
Because you're just trying to get to the truth, is what you're trying to get to. Yeah, that's it.
I think that helps everybody, even in the worst cases, even if even in the cases of a violent crime. Tell me what happened, and I'll try to tell the story in with enough benefit of the doubt to at least understand how something could happen.
You mentioned leaks, and I was just about to ask you about it, and give us some insight into how they work. And I mean, you said you sometimes get material leaked to you from the defense attorneys, and I mean there's a whole course that needs to be taught on how to balance leaks and how to work with them and how not to. I mean, once you start on one side, you got to go to the other side. It's a whole process.
Well, you're right. Leaks. When somebody leaks something to you, a leak is, it's like an off the record comment. Somebody wants you to know some information, but they don't want their name to be associated with it. They don't
usually
want
the person who's complaining about you the most publicly.
Right. But and that may be because of where things are in the process. They if somebody provides some information to me anonymously or off the record, I have to verify the information and not quote that person. Sometimes that person is leaking the information to me because they are trying to get at the other person. They are trying to do the other person wrong. And my job is to take that into consideration. A person who's leaking something to me has something to gain. And sometimes what that person has to gain makes what they're willing to share with me too unreliable, too biased for me to tell, for me to pass along. Sometimes they leak something to me because it's too early for them to admit something. And leaking something to me might be essentially a trial balloon, a chance to have a hopefully trusted reporter report something and to soften the eventual blow when a negative story is finally made public. And that is part of, I understand that when somebody leaks me that somebody is going to plead guilty in a case, that's because part of that is because they want the public to know that the person is going to admit guilt, and there might even and a plea bargain involves some negotiation, and that might take a certain penalty off the table. And for the people who are on social media clamoring for people, for justice and for retribution and all those things that are not based on fact but are based just on emotion, allowing me to report something exclusively can pave the way, can lower expectations that the retribution that they're hoping for will come. And that is part of my job. And and as long as I report the agreement accurately, then I am willing to do that.
People, I don't know if everyone realizes the impact that WTOP radio has on news coverage. Because you guys, everybody listens to you, and there's a lot of news people in this town working who listen to you, and then you get an exclusive, and then they run with it. It's often the case, which is, I can't tell you how many times we got called from networks who say, "Oh, I heard your client on TOP. Can they do an interview with us?"
Or when we worked in TV in DC, hey, TOP has this, go chase it down, do a longer story on it. Okay.
Well, that is, that's the good and the bad of the thing. I think that in radio, you do have some of the advantages over TV in that you don't, I only have 35 seconds to tell a story on the air, and I don't need pictures. So all I need is 5 sentences of news for a 35-second report. So I think that's, and it's easy for me to put a 35-second report together. So I think that's part of the reason why news radio is a good place to break news. You need a little bit of, a couple of little nuggets to advance a story. And that's breaking news. And the expectation is that TV stations and newspapers may follow up and do the story a little bit later. If they're nice, they'll say as first reported by WTOP. But
are you ever tempted to call them up and say, "Hey, give us the credit"? You ever
Of course. When on Twitter, I don't do it all the time, but there's certainly, there've been times where I've said, when somebody has tweeted, breaking on channel XYZ, I will respond on Twitter, after hearing it on WTOP, right? I don't need, I don't need to do that all the time.
Neal, you've worked at WTOP since 1997, and that's long. A lot of reporters and journalists don't stay. I guess it's not long for TOP, because TOP, I think WTOP, powerhouse news, one of the biggest stations, I think, in the country when it comes to news and listeners. So it may not be as historic for like WTOP, because you guys seem to have people longevity there. But why do you stay in radio? Why do you stay in DC? Is it just the thrill of the storytelling, and there's so much good news to tell here?
Oh, well, my wife wishes that I would have done TV and made more money. She wishes that I would change my profession, but I tell her that I love my job and I look forward to going to work every day. Over time, I'm getting better at it, and I certainly haven't perfected it yet. So there's room for me to grow. I think, joking aside, there comes some seniority. There comes some benefits with being around for a while, being in the same place for a while. I think maybe news sources tend to trust you a little bit more over time, and I think that working for TOP, it is a well-established vehicle for breaking news, and it is I think newsmakers and their public relations people know that it's a valuable place to break news. And
I can't agree with you more.
So I'm glad. I used to be envious of people who worked for the Post, because leaks and exclusives would always come that way. I think that over time, I have learned a little bit more about how I can convince somebody to share something with me first, because I can give it the timeliness and the constraints of radio, can be used to an advantage for a newsmaker, whereas the Post would do this much. If I do a story that's this much, and by the way, I forgot that I'm just on the radio, and I was saying I could make I could report a small story rather than a large, expansive story, and that might work to a newsmaker's advantage. So,
but what do the kids say to you when they hear you on the radio? I mean,
the kids, it's funny. My kids, like, when we go out to eat and I order ice cream or something like that, and in the rare times that somebody recognizes my voice and says, "Aren't you on WTOP?" My kids are always amazed that somebody has heard of me.
I was going to ask you that. Your voice is so distinctive that there's no way that you don't get recognized so much from your voice.
Well, it happens. It happens in strange times, in strange locations. I was making an appointment recently for a colonoscopy. And
that's where you want to be recognized.
The person between the person who took the call and made the appointment, and to her credit, when she was signing off, she said, "Oh, I listen to you all the time on WTOP." To that person, the person when I checked into the hospital for the colonoscopy, they all the nurse who was doing the prep, they were all listeners. Great. It's very good to I'm glad to know that people are listening.
Hey, well, first of all, you're given a good PSA for getting colonoscopy checks. And second of all, maybe they'll make sure, we don't want to be on the news from Neal Augenstein saying, oh my God, I got a really bad colonoscopy.
They always said, yeah, Neal had an ass for radio. So,
So Neal, you've covered, a variety of stories from features to hard breaking news in your career, and you talk, doing a lot of crime and stuff. Is there a beat that you prefer, or are there stories that you kind of pivot to that you'd rather cover, or do you just like, like the breaking, like being in the action, or do you have a preference?
I guess over time it has changed. When I started in the business, I liked to do a whole lot of man on the street interviews where you interview people and the sound, of their voices was what made the reports. 10 years ago or so, I was the tech editor of WTOP when we were, and I learned a lot about social media and consumer technology. And then after that, I got tired of that a bit, and I liked doing crime and hard news. And so I really do think that having a variety of those things and being able to shift quickly from one to the other, depending upon what's in the news or what people are going to be talking about that day. So I like the flexibility of not having so specific a beat that I'm limited to one thing. I like having the opportunity to do a 40-second report on something and then moving on to the next story. And
how many of those do you do a day? How many?
Yeah, when I come on in the morning, I make my first phone call to the editor at 4:30 in the morning. The expectation is that I'll have a story on the air by the 6 a.m. hour. I'll do a couple of versions of that story that will run until maybe 10 o'clock or noon. And then I'll have another couple, then I'll have a second story that will be on the air for the afternoon, a recorded version that will be on the air there. That being said, I'm constantly looking down the road and I'm throwing out some feelers to people. And there's a lot of stories that I will cover when it finally comes into me. So the kind of stories that may take a couple of days to pull together, I can always expect to get a pitch from a public relations person.
Are there somebody besides us? No, it's not allowed.
I sometimes get them, but you guys have figured out the way to pitch in a way that if you can spark me to the idea of being able to do something, you know that I am so busy that if you can help me put that story together by in the next half hour or hour before I have to move on to my next thing, then I will eventually get your story on the air. And you help me get the elements to be able to tell that story.
But also probably, we try to look at everything as former reporters. So we wouldn't even come to you. PR people should know not to even come to reporters unless it's a true story, and you have all the elements. Do you remember any of the big?
But we're not waking up at 4 a.m. to.
No, we're not. Well, maybe we should be.
That would be a good idea. Like, dude, I got an interview.
Maybe that's our best time to get a hold of Neal. It's at 4 a.m. But there's been so many incredible stories in DC from, the snipers, Chandra Levy, 9/11, every political scandal under the sun. Is there any story that either haunts you that you can't, or like stories that you were super proud of your work, or just stories that stand out? You cover so many stories in a day, and you're probably working at least a half a dozen stories at any given moment. Are there things that really stand out to you over your career in the Washington, D.C. area?
It's funny. It's not really funny, but I've covered. You mentioned the sniper stories. Obviously, those were totally totally engrossing and scary, and they were happening at the time, and people were in fear, and it was dramatic, and so there were these constant bad news stories to tell, but part of the job was to try to keep things in perspective. And that obviously was one of the most difficult stories to tell, because it went on for, I think, 21 days, and it was very scary, and scary for me, for my, for people I know, and certainly for listeners. So in cases like that, I feel like part of my job, and it's actually a benefit for me, because I don't really, in cases like that, when it's my job to do something, I sort of feel like I'm holding the hand of the listeners. I'm trying to ask enough questions so I understand what's happening. I think that it's important for me to put things into perspective so that I know that, wow, this is really, really bad right now. But, I think that in the same way that a parent would tell a child, things will get better, things will get solved, this won't last this way forever. I think that is part of my job on the radio. And the times when I'm able to go on the air and slow things down and just say, yes, this is what's happening right now in this area. The police and is aware of it. They're working on the situation. And if I can provide that sort of, I hope, calm in a difficult situation, I think that's one of the things that I can do, and one of the things that's most important to our listeners. I will, I promise to get all the details later, but right now, I think that people in their car want to know that they're safe, that their kids are safe, and that so that's one of the stories that I think has stayed with me and was one of the most challenging for me.
So the opposite of the temptation to hype things up, which would
like a public
get you
service,
more clicks and more more listens, and
there is plenty of that. There was plenty of and I don't want to cast aspersions. I would like to think that all news people, even the newest news people, would understand that it's important to not hype things up, not add extra fear in a already fear-inducing situation. I think that the business continues to change. There are a lot of people who didn't go to broadcast journalism, didn't get their degrees in broadcast journalism, and may not know as much in their soul that it's the reasons why you don't hype bad news just for clicks or just for listeners. I'd like to think that has something to do with my training, but also I'd hope my humanity, that that I don't need to be adding more to the world's problems.
If you were to sit back and to give journalism a grade, or to see, obviously journalism has changed a lot. It's going to continue to change. Now people are, quote journalists, and they, like you said, they didn't go to school. They've never been trained. They don't understand sources and, all the things that we were taught as journalists and how to really cover the news. And then you've got all the public who weighs in and decided that the media is just, a big, we're in bed with the corporations or the pharmaceutical companies talking about vaccines. And, there's just so much negativity about, shoot the messenger times 10,000. How do you, and I'm sure this is on every journalist's mind, thinking about, wow, we're seen as, the enemy of the state and so on and so forth. What do you think that as a collective, we need to think about figuring out how to change journalism at all? Or do we need to figure out how, should we start forcing people to get certifications, or I don't even know, to make sure these are the reporters who actually, have been certified at, like doctors. Well, they got a degree, how do we try to give journalism, understand that media is the fourth estate? Without journalism, there's going to be so much more corruption. There's the small papers dying. And then, that's where corruption breeds when there's no sunlight on it. Is there a quick fix? Is this a long-term fix? Like, what, this must
I
be
think the
on
fix
your
is
mind.
shorter than your question, Kathy.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it's important to have certified journalists. I mean, obviously, it's a great question, and there are, obviously, journalists are painted, politicians especially are politicians and others have figured out that journalists can make good targets in for their campaigns, both the political campaigns, but also sociological campaigns, their harangues on social media. I think, unfortunately, that a lot of reporters do make things easy for them. I think that as quickly as as easily as people can sling arrows at reporters, sadly, there are times when I think reporters are that quick to perpetuate a story without trying to understand it deeply enough. And I think that's, I'm not sure what, I don't think it's laziness. I think that the industry has changed so much that reporters don't have the time, or to fully investigate a story before reporting it. I'm glad to have to work at a place where I can say, I know that it's a story we're reading we're hearing the story. It's huge on social media, but I don't think that is reflective of what the reality is. And thankfully, I work at a place where they give me enough latitude to investigate that. I think a good example of that is that Loudoun County, Virginia, which has been the focus of the school system there, has been the subject of investigation. It's currently the subject of a special grand jury investigation. It was part of how Governor Glenn Youngkin got elected. The outrage of parents at what's happening in schools. And my reporting on that has been somewhat different than the other reporting on that, because a lot of the reporting has taken as an assumption that there's been wrongdoing or malfeasance and things like that. And I, as a reporter, have not seen that. I've seen mistakes. I've seen things that could have been done better. I've seen, gaffes. I've seen clumsy handling of things. But to my way of thinking, that does not manifest the intent that is needed to say that somebody is wrong, or somebody lied, or somebody covered up. those phrases, cover up and lie, those require intent, right? It's not a mistake. It's not a misspeak. So while a lot of other reportand politicians are saying, lies and cover-ups, I'm not saying that. I'm saying mistakes and an investigation ongoing and things like that. So there are times when I am out of step with my colleagues, and I'd like to think that somewhere down the line, people will be able to look back at my work and say, he did his best to report on the facts and to keep things down the middle and to keep things fair, tasteful, in context, with perspective. And to me, that's what a journalist does. And that's what I try to do each day with each story. Somewhere along the line, I have some fun, and that is part of life. But that is sort of what my job is, and I guess it's more than just my job that I get a paycheck from. I think that's sort of the way I see life, in that, and the kind of the message that I tell my kids about trying their best, being fair, being open, and hopefully they all intersect somewhere down the road.
I think that's a great place to leave things. I think he really summed it up nicely, but I got another question. So no, just real quick though, social media, how has that changed your job? You mentioned that things show up on social media, but you have to post, you have to write an online story. Do you post before you do your story? How do you
not
get that all sorted out?
You're so old school. I have to post. I have to do a story.
That's what the kids tell me.
I get to post. I get to do a story. I get to interact with WTOP's listeners around the clock on my Twitter account. Back in the old days, the only time I would communicate with the audience was a 30-second report once an hour. Now I am available to listeners on Twitter around the clock.
Is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? Because that also is hard, I would think, right? Is that hard to manage?
Well, reality, no. Here's what I think. Everybody is so fixated on how many followers you have. If you look at my Twitter account at Augenstein WTOP, you'll see that I follow as many people as follow me. To me, following somebody on Twitter is like doing a personal appearance in their living room. I have, by clicking the follow that person, I have told that person, what you have to say is of interest to me. I'm here to listen to you. You are always able to talk into my ear. If my hearing aid is working, I will hear it. You are always welcome to reach out to me. The reality is, I'm not reading everybody's post. When somebody @s me on Twitter, I read it. And if it's something that I want to respond to, I will. So, how much of an investment of time is that? I don't think it's that much of an investment in time, but I think it does go a long way to that bond with the listener. And WTOP's goal is that wherever you are, whenever you want to be in touch with us, you either turn on your car radio, you'll type online and you look at the story, or you'll look at your phone on social media, and we're there. So I am glad to have the opportunity to communicate with people in all of these different ways.
Does it help you with sourcing and tell the story? And do you ever use it to reach out to people? And I mean, is it a good tool now to deepen and broaden your journalistic tools, basically?
There are yes, it is. I certainly, it doesn't necessarily always pay off in a full story, but it does improve my network of communications. Somebody who in their private life who happens to follow me, if there's something going on in their agency, maybe they'll shoot me a private message and let me know that something's going on. Maybe I should look into it. So that's something I can do. There have been times where if I've seen smoke over downtown, I've posted, does anybody see, does anybody over there see that smoke? What am I missing? And often that will provide some photos and some information there. So it is a two-way street. Sometimes I get the information. Sometimes I provide the information. I think with Twitter and with Facebook, I'm able to share a little bit of my private. It's not really my private life. I mean,
updates about the kids and your passion for pizza.
Well, I'll talk about pizza if there's something that a parent can relate to, in an interaction with my kids, maybe I'll take a picture of the kid's shoe and I'll tweet something funny about that. And that sort of interaction I think goes a long way to letting people know that I'm a person who just happens to be a reporter who asks a lot of questions, but I also have my own life and my own kids, and what happens at the barbecue can sometimes be funny. What happens, I'm always glad to poke a little fun at myself. I think that goes a long way towards building a bond, and so I love Twitter. I love social media. I never made that proclamation so dramatically as
Wow.
I have just on your show right now.
Wow,
But
we have an exclusive. Wait, we're breaking in. Hold on.
That
Neal
is.
Augenstein loves social media.
And we're not even hyping it.
Right.
We're just
Not yet.
telling the truth. We have it from the source himself.
So
Hey,
Neal, thanks so much for spending so much time with us. As we wrap up, because we don't want to take you away forever. But what is there any question that we didn't ask you that you wish we would have asked you, or is there anything that you think people need to know about journalism that you think that there's a mystery out there that people just don't know?
I will share something with you, which I think I've probably shared with you over the years, and with other public relations people. Don't call me. Don't ever call me on the phone unsolicited. I will hang up. Hopefully, I'll hang up before being rude. I don't have the time to take a cold call. Please email me. Text me, email me. Don't text me, because text dings in my ear and will wake me up. Email me if you catch my attention, I'll get right back to you. Be available for when I have a follow-up question for you, and help me understand what the story is. And hopefully we'll work together, and I'll find something interesting in your pitch that would resonate with my listeners, and I'll ask you for a few elements, and you'll provide me the storytelling that I need, and everyone's happy.
When you don't return an email, should people just assume that means I'm not interested in? Should we ever assume?
No, he sends it. He'll tell you that he sent it to other people in the newsroom.
I usually do send, if it's something that I think someone else could use, I do send it to my news director and the assignment editor. If it's not something that I want to jump on right then, but it's still a pretty good story, then I'll tell you that I've forwarded it to somebody, and then that's up to you to get in touch with that person and you try again. It's like a duo. It's a mulligan. that you're getting another chance to make the pitch to somebody else. I can't be bothered with it. I'm very busy. I need a nap. I won't be able to handle that story today, but maybe someone else at the newsroom will be able to handle it. You're getting close, and somebody, hopefully you can close the deal.
When is your napping hours? So we should know not to call you. Is it 3 o'clock?
1 o'clock till 3 o'clock is when I'm usually recharging.
Recharging.
At Augenstein, WTOP, we are honored to have had you share with us all of these insights. You are the TOP reporter at WTOP, and I don't know if you've ever been called that before.
Okay, well, I have not with a straight face,
Yeah.
but thank you guys for all that you do to help people understand what it is that we do, and that we can all coexist and all be happy and all do well and all be well.
All right. Thank you very much. Go gain schluff. Go to bed.
Okay, I'll talk with you guys soon.
So it was so great catching up with Neal. He's an amazing journalist. And Mark, you know this because you went to school with him back in the day.
Back way, uphill in the snow, both ways, blah, blah, blah. Yes. But, it's amazing. First of all, he's up at 4 a.m, starting his day, and he has to have a story on by 6. I don't know how you even do that, because you can't. It's not like you can call people and get interviews at 4 a.m, but amazing. What did he say? 5 sentences, 35 seconds. He tells the story. It's amazing.
Well, we hoped you enjoyed this week's episode. After Deadline, the media podcast is a production of On the Marc Media. If you enjoyed and want to hear more of our voices and the stories of incredible journalists across the country, be sure to follow us on social media at On the Marc Media and subscribe to After Deadline, the media podcast, anywhere that you normally listen to your podcast. Until next time, we'll catch up with you after Deadline.